Let's continue our Duke in the NBA 2021-2022 season in review series. Coming up on today's show, really exciting players. The Jones brothers, Tre and Tyus. How did they fare this past NBA season? And one of my favorites, an absolute shooter, Gary Trent Jr. They're in Toronto. What did he do for the Raptors? We find out on today's edition of Locked On Blue Devils. Here we go.
Hey, make sure you listen, man, to Locked On Blue Devils with J.J. Jackson. He's awesome, baby.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. It's so great to have you here with us on today's show. If you haven't followed us on Twitter yet, you should do that. Follow the show on Twitter at LO_Blue Devils. Follow me on Twitter at _JJ_Jackson_. As you know, Locked On Blue Devils is a daily podcast devoted to everything going on in the world of Duke athletics. As the month of August nears, so does football season. But for now, we will continue to talk about the NBA season that concluded, our year-in reviews for Duke and the NBA players. And coming up on today's show, we've got a great one for you. We've got Tre Jones with the Spurs, Tyus Jones with the Grizzlies, also talking about our good pal Gary Trent Jr., the Toronto Raptors. Again, if you haven't done so already, follow and subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free wherever. Also, make sure you're following us too. Press that subscribe button. We're trying to up the subscribers on the race to 500 subscribers. That'll be to celebrate once we get to that. Without further ado, it's time to get after it. Jump into today's edition, Locked On Blue Devils.
And we're back here on Locked On Blue Devils. JJ Jackson here with you, and so fired up and excited to be talking with our next guest. Once again, it's Shawn Coleman, the host of Locked On Grizzlies. Another NBA season has come to a close, and we're continuing our NBA check-ins with former Duke Blue Devils. Shawn, as always, the time is greatly appreciated. How's your summer been so far, partner?
Hey, it's been great. Definitely enjoying the Grizzlies' successful season. Definitely enjoying the Braves being reigning World Series champions. So, hey, it's an enjoyable one.
Yeah, not much to complain about in your world then, I reckon. That's for sure. Well, look, we talked last year. And last year in our conversation, we were talking about way more former Duke Blue Devils than we saw this past season. That was when Grayson Allen and Justice Winslow were there in Memphis teaming up with Tyus Jones. The three of those guys, as Duke fans well remember, won a national championship together back in 2015. It was only Tyus Jones that was a member of the Grizzlies this season. And, man, that guy continues to really play good basketball in that backup role. Talk to me about Tyus this season in the 21-22 campaign that just finished.
Absolutely, and it was great to see, and it was very much needed, right? We saw the breakout season that John Morant had, and it was absolutely outstanding. Morant is, his playing style, and with the body type that he is, he's someone that's a bit injury prone, and so Tyus Jones, it's hard to remember that even at the age of now, I believe 26, Tyus Jones has been in the league now for 7 full seasons. But with as young as he is, the experience that he's gained, it allows for him to be able to continue to evolve. He had a pretty disappointing 2020-2021 season, but he was able to bounce back last year, stepping up and standing out in a starting role. Started 25 games for the Grizzlies. We were 20-5 in the games that he started. And not only did he continue his historic pace when it came to assist-to-turnover ratio, he also had the best shooting season of his career so far. And then, of course, his leadership. Just overall, just a great asset. Even if our franchise player is John Morant, we arguably have one of the top 5 1-2 combinations at point guard in the NBA, and Tyus Jones is a big reason for that.
No denying that. I mean, a former first-round pick, as we mentioned, one season playing college basketball for Duke. You cap it off by winning a national championship. The career for Tyus starts with his hometown Minnesota Timberwolves. He is on a historic pace with the assist-to-turnover ratio. He just does not turn the basketball over, plain and simple. And now he's getting the opportunity to back up a really electrifying player in Ja Morant, who is sensational in every sense of the word. The season comes to a close. There's uncertainty about Tyus Jones' future, but Shawn, talk to me about what's next for Tyus. It seems like he's gotten a new deal with Memphis, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, 2 years, $2 million with the Grizzlies, and and this is also the offseason where the Grizzlies agreed to a long-term deal with Ja Morant. They're going to be playing Ja Morant nearly $40 million per, over the next 5 seasons starting after this year. So why would they commit $15 million over the next 2 seasons to Tyus Jones? Well, it's because of what Tyus Jones brings. The Grizzlies really value the idea of being able to have 40 to 45 minutes tonight with great floor general capabilities in Ja Morant and Tyus Jones. And also, Ja Morant's the type of player who you probably only need to play 65 to 70 games a year. You want to invest in him to be your leader in the playoffs where you really want to compete with titles. You can have Tyus Jones step up and support Ja in that way. So the versatility of Tyus is a bench general and also the ability to step up and start. There's even some capability of them two together. There's a really versatile combination that's really productive for the Grizzlies, so very much worth the investment.
Yeah, a big-time deal for Tyus and Ja Morant himself. You mentioned it. Tyus was 20-5 in games that he started the season. And that was a number that was so easy for basketball fans to really remember because that was just the record that Ja Morant wasn't available and why Memphis was still able to be one of the top teams this past season there in the Western Conference. What do you think it was specifically about Tyus himself, about his game, about his play style, maybe about even the parts around him that despite the fact that Ja Morant was not in the lineup, the Grizzlies were still able to win basketball games? What about Tyus' game made them able to do that?
I think it was just simply the confidence that he had in his combination as a scorer and a facilitator. At times, that was not there last year. It wasn't there when he started out with the Grizzlies. That really started to show from December to March in 2020 before the pandemic hit, and then it really showed last year after Tyus was really able to get a summer under his belt once again under Taylor Jenkins' system. But I think it was just the overall confidence. For the first time, not necessarily really in his career, but I think for the first time in terms of a long stretch of times, Tyus Jones had confidence in his ability as both a scorer and a facilitator, and he knew that he had the ability to decide between which he wanted to be based off what the game called for. So that overall confidence of having multiple ways to impact the game, I really think added to consistency, and it's what made him an effective basketball player in many different ways.
Is there any area in particular that continues to need improvement from Tyus? You mentioned the season. He had his best year shooting, which is something that obviously helps to improve on. We're seeing just an increase across the league, across the sport, each and every year with the number of three-point shots attempted, and it really does appear that in every sense of a jump shooter, Tyus has improved each season. Is there still levels to improve there, or on the defensive end, or what's coming to mind when you think about, okay, we've got this new deal for Tyus Jones to be Ja Morant's backup. How can he take that next step forward?
Well, I think really with the way that he could take the next step forward is to show last year is sustainable. Showing that he can shoot around 40% from three, maybe at 2.5 to 3 threes a game. Showing that when he's on the court, the playmaking ability of the Grizzlies defense is definitely an advantage. Showing that he possibly himself can maybe average a steal a game or something along those lines. To be honest, JJ, there really is not a lot for him to improve on from last year because of how outstanding he was in the role that he's asked to perform in. It's more the ability for him to sustain. If Tyus Jones puts together 2 straight seasons under this new contract like he did last year, it may, believe it or not, it will be an absolute bargain for the Grizzlies.
Without a doubt. I mean, he's such a great player, and hopefully he continues to play well there for Memphis. It seems as though that fan base has really enjoyed him. He's got that Stones nickname that so many people love, and he continues to play so well. Again, Shawn Coleman here with us, the host of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Thanks again for the time today, Shawn, and I'm hopeful that we get many more conversations over the years because that means either Tyus Jones or other Duke players are making way there for the Memphis Grizzlies. Thanks again.
Look forward to it, JJ. Have a great one.
All right. That's our buddy Shawn Coleman here with us on Locked On Blue Devils.
Let's take a quick timeout in today's edition of Locked On Blue Devils. Our show today is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're here on Locked On Blue Devils today. JJ Jackson alongside Jeff Garcia. He is the host of Locked On Spurs. And yet again, we're having another conversation. 1 year ago, we were talking about our guy, Tre Jones, and he played another season for the San Antonio Spurs. This year, I want to review the year. You've already done an amazing episode on Locked On Spurs of Tre Jones' season review, but we'll just do a quick summary here for the Blue Devils fans. Jeff, thanks for joining me today.
Not a problem. I'm always happy to help. And yeah, Tre Jones, think he might be looking at a very key season next year.
No doubt. I mean, look, things have definitely changed this offseason. DeJounte Murray is no longer going to be there for the San Antonio Spurs. We'll hold that for just a little bit. When we spoke last year at this time, it felt like there were glimpses that Greg Popovich and that San Antonio Spurs coaching staff saw from Tre Jones, who had a sensational 2-year career for Duke. His last year, he's the ACC Player of the Year and the ACC Defensive Player of the Year in the same season. This past year, Jeff, just from the outside looking in, it felt like he got way more burn and way more playing time out there for the Spurs.
Yeah, I think the Spurs are fully invested in Tre Jones moving forward. You know, it's about looking. I'm even wearing Duke blue right now on this Blue Devils podcast. But my point is that he got a spike in minutes. Didn't get relegated to the G League, which is good. Got a good playing time, but what really stood out was just how poised he is out on the court. In the NBA, where a traditionalist point guard is really not the norm, he is that. He's a throwback to the old days of set up guys first, look for your shot second. A lot of things stood out for me. One, his athleticism. I didn't know he was that sneaky athletic.
Yeah.
Really he has hops, can get to the rim, stop on a dime, has great acceleration. We saw this more because he was in the San Antonio uniform and not in an Austin uniform. Now, where he really took off was late season, where DeJounte got hurt. He was out for several games. And boy, did Tre Jones step in, really steadied the ship, really got the team focused, helped the Spurs at least push into the play-in tournament. As a matter of fact, I got his numbers here just to show you just how big of a jump it is. So in 7 games in April, the final month of the season, he was averaging about 29 minutes per game, gave San Antonio 12.3 points per game, 3.7 rebounds, and this is just crazy. 7 assists a game. So obviously he is a facilitator. He is that guy that's going to set the numbers show it. I mean, those were his best numbers the entire season. There was a little lull in mid-season, January, February. January only played 9 games, February 8 games, but you started seeing more trust in him in March. 14 games played. Started 1 game in March. Started 5 games in April. Well, I mean, obviously a large part because DeJounte was out. Is there room for improvement? Of course. Field goal, he averaged about 50% in the final month of the season for San Antonio. Granted, a lot of the shots were really, going to other players, your Keldon Johnson, your Devin Vassell's, your DeJounte Murray's at the time. But nevertheless, I'd like to see that kind of spike next season. Yeah, 3-point shooting, obviously that's key. You look at the numbers, you're like, oh my God, he shot 43% in April. Well, he was only taking about 2 per game. So I like to see those attempts climb up a lot more. But, I think the Spurs really got themselves a gem late in the second round when he was picked. Very, he's like he just reminds me of a pro's pro.
Yeah.
And even with media, really good with us. I know he won't scoff at your questions. He won't roll his eyes. I like how he starts every single answer with "yeah, for sure." Well, I got a kick out of that. Every single answer was "yeah, for sure." So it'll be, "Hey, Trey, you had 7 assists in the game." Yeah, for sure. So then, so I started noticing that about him. So good with media, good off the court as well. While the Spurs are out in Las Vegas right now, and players are traveling, he's actually stayed in San Antonio for the most part. I know right now he's in, I believe, in Minnesota with a Pro-Am tournament, but a large part of this, he's been in San Antonio helping out the community, cut the ribbon on a brand new public court that the Spurs donated to the city of San Antonio. He was there on hand. You got married, or at least engaged, I think, or he got engaged. Excuse me. So things are really, really looking up for him. But next season is going to be interesting because with DeJounte gone, who can get that starting job?
No kidding. Tre Jones, it's going to be a big year for him ahead. It's already been a big year for him. You look back at the 365 days. He's become a father during that time span. He went back to Duke, went back to campus to propose to his girlfriend, as you said, and is now engaged and entering that next stage of life. This year, we saw him take care of the basketball like his brother Tyus has done for Memphis. Tyus Jones historically is tops in the league in assist to turnover ratio. And Tre Jones has been great in that regard as well. Tell me about the defensive end of the floor. That's where, as we said, ACC Defensive Player of the Year as a college player. How's the defense been in the NBA?
I was really interested to see how that was going to adapt at the pro level, because at the pro level, he is considered undersized. And he is. I mean, I think at times you saw some defenses go at him, especially try to get him on the post. But when he was playing passing lanes, very instinctive. You were talking about, a guy who averaged at least 1.3 steals in the final month of the season. But again, defensively, I think the defensive schemes, the mindset, the defense first mentality in San Antonio is helping him. A lot of teams, really had issues when he was guarding one of their best perimeter guys. But I think he just needs more burn. And we saw the numbers on both ends of the court when he did get burned, especially late in the season where the keys were turned over to him to start with DeJounte out. My only question is that he's just, he can't help his size. Is that going to hurt him moving forward in the NBA? Look at his teammate, Josh Primo, 19-year-old kid, point guard, but is listed at 6'9". So, and still growing. So, then you draft Malachi Branham, another 6'9", 6'8" guard, 6'7" guard. Is that going to be to the detriment of Tre Jones? And I bring it up too because GM Brian Wright for San Antonio has spoken to the media and has told us they're looking for switchable players in the San Antonio rebuild. Tre Jones is not switchable. He's not. So those are the concerns I have for him moving forward, whether it be in San Antonio or elsewhere. But that is kind of the buzz right now among the Spurs fan base is the starting point guard spot already, Tre Jones's just by default because of DeJounte Murray's trade? Or are they really going to go rebuild and say, okay, Tre, you're backing up a teenager? I don't know how he's going to feel about that. You're going to back up a 19-year-old. Personally, I think he should be given the keys to the car to start the season. I think he's earned it. He paid his dues in the G League bubble, learning and playing second to DeJounte Murray, filling in admirably for him late in the season. That's kind of the debate right now among the fan base. Tre Jones, Josh Primo, and then you have Blake Wesley out of Notre Dame just tearing up the G League right now. Again, a switchable guard. Tre Jones is not that. So, it's just, how does he factor into this rebuild in San Antonio when the GM is saying, we want this type of player now, and Jones isn't? But,
right.
Okay, look, I think he's going to be very important to this team. He is considered a veteran now because the Spurs got younger. They drafted in 3 19-year-old. They traded away Derek White. They traded away Bryn Forbes. They traded away DeJounte Murray. They let Lonnie Walker say bye. So the team just got younger. I think they're the third, as of right now, they're the third youngest team in the NBA, and not by much. I think the average like 26.6 years old. And there's, I think the Thunder are like 26.4. So it's very young team. And I think Tre Jones and his steady hand, his, general on the floor mindset will help this rebuild.
No doubt about that. I think here we are in July looking at next season. You got to be excited about what Tre Jones could be. Yeah, for sure is how we would say it for Tre Jones with what he's going to be able to do this upcoming season. Let me end with this, Jeff. This past year for Duke basketball, we were able to celebrate the career of Mike Krzyzewski, 42 years as the head coach of Duke, spent many years as the Team USA head coach, led them to 3 gold Olympic medals. And then we saw Greg Popovich get his tour as the Team USA coach. Coach Pop is getting up there in age. He's about 4 years younger than Mike Krzyzewski himself. Are we getting close to the end of Coach Popovich's career?
Yeah.
When you truly think about the titans of the basketball coaching world, Coach K and Greg Popovich are some of those first names you think of.
Yeah, I would throw in there too, J.J. Jackson. I hear you're a pretty good coach too. But all kidding aside, I think if you read the tea leaves, I think it's obvious that this. I want to say obvious, but I would lean more towards this could be it for Pop heading into next season. And here are the tea leaves. Okay, 1, the team got younger. They're in a rebuild. So he ain't going to be winning championships anytime soon. It'll be a while until the Spurs are maybe just a playoff team. It's going to be a while. You figure Golden State's only going to get stronger. Denver's going to be there. I mean, you could probably list as of right now.
You could go through the West. Yeah.
Yeah. The West, the Lakers, who knows what they're going to do. But so there's the state of the franchise rebuild. They're not going to be winning titles anytime soon. It might be a while. You look at Quinn Snyder just exits Utah, openly says, I'm going to take a year off. So then you got Popovich. Could this be his last year? Another tea leaf to read is Brett Brown is back. Brett Brown has been through a rebuild in Philadelphia, the trust the process era. The Spurs are in the trust the process right now. He's going to be assistant coach to Popovich. Could they just be shaking off the coaching rust for him for a year? And then the next year say, okay, Brett, you're part of the family. You were in the family. Here are the keys to the car. Yeah. There's just the age as well. The rigors of the NBA season. Nobody's going to know when he's going to exit. I mean, I personally think it'll probably even be last minute kind of decision thing where he'll just spring it on the Spurs. I hope he doesn't. I hope if he is planning to leave, he tells them well in advance so they can start their coaching search.
Sure.
But I think that would be the biggest nail in the coffin of the Spurs dynasty era. And, he is the last link, and once he exits, it's going to be a while before the Spurs get back to that heights of the NBA.
And much like Coach K, Greg Popovich certainly deserves his flowers. Coach K let the world know this is my last year. So if Pop decides to do something like that, or at least gives him a heads up beforehand, he will rightfully get praise and recognition for what he's been able to do. Quinn Snyder, a name to watch, as you said, a Duke guy in Quinn Snyder. So we're cool with Duke guys all over the place, and we'll certainly see what this next year looks like for Tre Jones. Check out the Locked On Spurs podcast. Jeff, I said it a little bit earlier, but you did a full episode, right, on what Tre Jones was able to do this past year. Plug it before we let you go.
Yeah, we did a full Tre Jones, recap of his last season. I think your fan base and the Blue Devil fans will be happy with the grade we gave him. So
all right.
Check it out at Locked On Spurs. Subscribe everywhere. Wherever you get the Blue Devils podcast, the exact same platforms, you can get Locked On Spurs.
No kidding. You're right about that. Jeff, we'll do this again sometime next year. Thank you.
Great. No problem.
It's Jeff Garcia joining us on Locked On Blue Devils. All right, and welcome back into Locked On Blue Devils here. JJ Jackson alongside Shawn Woodley, the host of Locked On Raptors, is now here with us. We're talking all things Duke in the NBA. And Gary Trent Jr. had quite the season this past year for Toronto. Shawn, the time is greatly appreciated. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, man. Always happy to talk about Gary Trent Jr., one of the more fun guys on the Raptors.
He's really exciting, both on the court and off the court. Got a career started in Portland and has now moved over to Toronto. Tell me a little bit about what you knew about Gary Trent Jr. As he was making his way over to join the Raptors.
Yeah, honestly, I kind of just knew him from the bubble in sort of like a big mainstream way, right? Where he kind of went off there for Portland in the bubble. And, always thought he was a pretty interesting player. Thought he was, in theory, a pretty good piece around Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. Maybe not quite the defender on the wings you maybe want next to those guys. But yeah, he was a pretty exciting guy. And when the Raptors traded for him, it was kind of out of left field. It was very surprising. Norm Powell was on the trade market for sure. I was wondering, are they going to go try to get picks? Are they going to go and try to swing a deal for, a big man or something like that? Because that was an issue that they had with their lineup at the time. This was in the middle of the Tampa Bay season where it was basically a lost year. It was a nightmare. The team gets COVID in the second half of the season and they win 4 games for the rest of the way. And so, yeah, it caught me off guard, but he had this stretch after he joined the Raptors where it really was one of the only good things that happened to the Raptors that season. He hit a game-winning buzzer beater against the Wizards. He had a 45-point game. I think he had another 40-point game in there. It was really fun to see him kind of go off, and you're sitting there like, well, Norm Powell was going to be a free agent anyway, and now they've gone and gotten this guy? All right, sign me up, because he was a ton of fun to watch, and I think last year kind of fit into a really nice role. It was really effective for the team, and I figure that's going to be kind of a thing that carries forward here as well as, shooting works everywhere, right? And that's the thing he brings more than anything else. He's just an excellent, excellent shooter, and that's something the Raptors desperately need. And so he's a super valuable piece.
Yeah, the shot's so fun to look at and just watch, and we saw that in the lone season that he played for the Duke Blue Devils, how terrific he was in the college game. On that same team for Duke, they had Wendell Carter Jr., and Marvin Bagley III. Grayson Allen now plays in the NBA. Several NBA guys on that team that were in the starting lineup with Gary Trent Jr. He falls to the second round of the draft where Portland was able to nab him. And now over there in Toronto, the three-point shot is the first thing that jumps off the screen to anybody because he's knocking it down at such a crazy clip. I mean, every time he shoots it, you feel pretty good about it going in. What else are you seeing in his NBA game? If Duke fans haven't seen him in a little bit on the offensive end of the floor, what are you seeing from him?
First off, a quick note on the shooting as well to kind of build upon what you said. He's so fun to watch because he almost gets better the more contested he is. It's a delight. You can get him for a wide open corner three and you're like, that might not go in. But if you give him a late clock three where there's a dude draped all over him, he's probably going to knock it down and it's going to be awesome. There was a time, this didn't end up being the way the season finished, but there was a time last year, kind of midway through, where he actually had a higher percentage per NBA.com's tracking data, a higher percentage of threes made when the closest defender was within 3 feet than he did on wide open threes. That kind of speaks to how fun he is and just sort of how brazen he is. He's got that gunner spirit that I love to watch. And then, on top of that, he added some elements to his game last season that were interesting. He's a guy who I don't think is ever going to necessarily be one of these high octane scoring guards who can kind of carry an offense. I don't think he's good enough playmaker for that. I don't think he has the sort of 3-level scoring ability that a guy like, say, Zach LaVine or Devin Booker has, because he's just not that great at getting to the rim, but he's kind of found some counters for that. And he has a wonderful little mid-range game that he's got sort of worked into things where it'll swing to him. He'll get run off the line. He'll take a couple dribbles in, and that is just as money as his 3-point game is right now. And if that's all you're going to get from him, that is pretty darn impressive. Beyond that, he had a defensive season last year that I think is a little polarizing. Some folks would say he was really good. Some folks would say he was less good, but kind of got a lot of steals and sort of jacked up the numbers that way. I thought he was kind of exactly what the Raptors needed defensively. This is not a team that needs some sort of wing, defensive ringer who can, stay with the best defensive guy or best offensive guy on the other team. They have OG Anunoby for that. They have Pascal Siakam. They have Precious Achiuwa. They have Scotty Barnes. But what Gary Trent Jr. really does that kind of feeds into what the Raptors like to do is he's really good at hunting steals, either, in one-on-one coverage, poking the ball free, or just sort of, being a wizard in the passing lanes, finding, spots to kind of cut in and go for those steals. He gambles a lot. He'll get out of position quite a bit, and that's part of the Gary Trent Jr. experience, but he is a huge driver of the Raptors transition game, which last season was really the only way they could score any points. They had a pretty rough half-court offense, at least for most of the season, and the extra points that they were able to generate because Gary Trent Jr. was turning guys over all the time were super, super valuable, and it's a big reason why, outside of Pascal Siakam, he drove offensive play for the Raptors more effectively than anybody else when he was on the floor.
Shawn Woodley's here with us. He is the host of Locked On Raptors. We're talking about Gary Trent Jr. and the season he just had. The 2018 NBA draft is when he came into the league. So folks across the NBA have gotten to know Gary Trent Jr. For his play now at this point. As we sort of transition, I want to talk about Gary Trent Jr. off the floor, the personality that you're seeing. I know League Fits is a big fan of some of the outfits you're going to see Gary Trent Jr. enter the arena in and that sort of thing. But what has stood out to you, like for Duke people that might not have been able to follow Gary Trent Jr., you got to go across the country border to get up there with Raptors coverage. What has stood out about Gary Trent and his personality?
He's kind of just like a vibes king when he's out there. Everyone seems to love him. The fits, as you mentioned, are immaculate more often than not. Sometimes puzzling, but like he pulls everything he wears off because he's just kind of got that confidence. It's awesome to see. And, he's not super forthcoming with the media necessarily. Like, actually, his dad, Gary Trent Sr., who played for the Raptors at a time, has kind of been more of the media star of the two. He's kind of made it his way into the regular rotation of radio guests and stuff like that who will come on the national stations here. And, he's a lot of fun. He's very forthcoming and very candid. Gary Trent Jr. is a little bit more reserved with the media, but with the team, he seems like he's having a great time. When he's not playing, he's there doing sideline dances and he's there supporting the guys. And he's also been heavily featured in a lot of endorsements that you'll only ever see if you have Canadian cable. So apologies, but he had a thing last year where him and Scotty Barnes were in a Smucker's, a peanut butter and jam commercial, essentially, for Smucker's and Jif peanut butter. And there were 4 or 5 different editions of that came out over the course of the season. That was super fun. It's always neat because when you're on the Raptors, you're doing advertisements for a whole country, and every company is well, there's one of the 14 famous people we can lean on here. Let's go and have you do everything. And so that's been a fun thing too. Again, not super forthcoming with the media, but ultimately, who cares about talking to us? He's really great with the team. He's super fun to watch, and yeah, he's been a blast to have around for the last year and a half for sure.
A vibes king, I think, is the best way to sum it up. I love that. That's great. So looking forward to next season, I mean, what are you kind of expecting for Gary Trent Jr.? Is this a long-term play potentially for the Toronto Raptors? What does the next basketball year look like?
That's a really fascinating question, JJ, because I think it could go a whole bunch of different ways. He has 1 year left on his deal before he has a player option at the end of next season, and he's going to want some money. You're seeing Keldon Johnson make $20 million a year. I think Gary Trent Jr. certainly fancies himself a better player than that. And so, if he has a big year here, that could actually work against the Raptors' chances of keeping him. They have a history of paying their own guys. They're not afraid to go into the tax if they have a really good team on hand. And I don't know right now if they'll think that they're good enough to pay the tax at this time next season. But if Gary Trent Jr. goes off next year, that probably helps them feel like they're good enough to be a tax team and be comfortable giving him whatever bag he's going to ask for. But the thing with Gary Trent Jr. is that he's very tradable. He's on a $17 million contract, and the Raptors have been rumored to be after Kevin Durant. And if that comes to fruition, I would assume that right now the Raptors' offer to the Nets has Gary Trent Jr. in it. The Nets seem like they're not compelled by any offers they've seen, but just based on the money, the youth, and the fact that, you got to give up good stuff to get good stuff, but I don't think the Raptors want to give up Scotty Barnes or even Pascal Siakam to get KD in the door. I do think there's a chance he's a Brooklyn Net next season if the Nets cave and say, well, we're not going to get anything else. I guess we just got to take this Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, and all the picks deal from the Raptors that I'm pretty sure would be on the table right now already and will be for the rest of time until he's traded. So that's interesting. As far as his role with the team next year, if you're not familiar with what the Raptors are doing, they're kind of going with what we call Vision 6-9, where other than Trent, Malachi Flynn, and Fred VanVleet, everyone on the team is between 6'7" and 6'9". I guess they drafted Christian Coloco, who's 7'1". He's the weirdo on the team. He sticks out like a sore thumb now. But like their whole thing is everyone on the floor is switchable. Everyone on the floor is able to guard every position, play any position on offense. Thad Young is just as much a point guard as he is a center, just depending on who he's playing with. And I think that in a way sort of works a little against Gary Trent Jr.'s fit with the team just because he's not that, right? He's 6'5". He's not this long-rangey defender who's quick and sort of agile and all this stuff. But I do think sort of my dream for the Gary Trent Jr. experience next season, we've talked about how confident he is. We've talked about the shooting. We've talked about the mid-range game. Gary Trent Jr. is meant to be a six-man, man. This guy is meant to be a gunner. He is meant to go and win six-man of the year some year. And I would love if the Raptors kind of reoriented their hierarchy a little bit. Went with the starting five of Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, and Precious Achiuwa, which would be just a defensive monster and was in short minutes last year. Bring Gary Trent Jr. in off the bench to roll with Chris Boucher and Thad Young, Otto Porter Jr., and I think you're looking at a guy who can carry that second unit offense against second unit defenses and probably put up pretty comparable numbers to what he had this year as a starter. And all of a sudden, Tyler Hero's looking behind him like, my reign as sixth man of the year is probably in jeopardy because Gary Trent Jr. is there just gunning away like the sixth man I think he was kind of born to be.
I love that. Let's speak that into existence. And if it ultimately ends up that a trade is in play for Kevin Durant or any superstar, and you're included in it, that's always a good thing. It's a good thing to be wanted. And like you're saying, it seems like Gary Trent Jr. is going to have several teams that want him once this contract comes to a close. Shawn, this has been a whole lot of fun. Always great catching in on former Duke Blue Devils and what they're getting up to these days at the NBA. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, JJ. Anytime, man.
That's Shawn Woodley. Check out Locked On Raptors wherever you get your podcast and watch them on YouTube. This is Locked On Blue Devils. What a fun show this has been. Thanks so much for watching, listening, and supporting Locked On Blue Devils. A lot of fun recapping the NBA seasons for Tre Jones, Tyus Jones, and Gary Trent Jr. My thanks once again to Jeff Garcia, Sean Coleman, and Shawn Woodley for joining the conversation today. I think it's so awesome within the Locked On network that we've got NBA shows that I can chat with from the Duke Blue Devils perspective. These guys playing in college, then heading off to the NBA and still getting the opportunity to follow their careers. Make sure that you check out all of the great NBA podcasts that were mentioned throughout today's show. And thanks again for supporting Locked On Blue Devils as always. If you haven't done so already, give me a follow on Twitter @_JJ_Jackson_. Follow our show on Twitter @LO_Blue Devils. Make sure you follow and subscribe for free to Locked On Blue Devils wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe on YouTube. Share the video with your friends. We're trying to get to 500 subscribers. Thanks so much for supporting Locked On Blue Devils. That's going to do it for today's show. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good